Hello there, and thank you for joining me as we take a little soft-spoken journey through a house on the water, inspiration for living at the water's edge, and just ramble very softly about architecture, design, how it connects with nature. We'll be jumping around a little bit in today's book, but I hope you get to sit back and relax and enjoy. And thank you so much for joining me. All right, let's get started. Now, this is a lovely little book I actually picked up at a library sale. They were getting rid of extra copies, and I saw this and I thought, well, it's two of my favorite things, architecture and water. So I've got to see it. And it does not disappoint. So let's just flip and start somewhere random, shall we? So here's a beautiful part. Between the garden and the bay, this simple rectangular house, renovated by architect Cass Calder-Smith, sits on a tight waterfront lot perched between a wonderful private entry garden on the landward side and San Francisco Bay to the west. In many Bay Area towns, the houses along the water crowd out all the views of the water, and any sense of the building or its occupants is mostly of double-wide garage doors, relieved by occasional spats of splashes of tropical greenery. But this house stands out from its 1- and 2-story neighbors in that it serves as a graceful bridge between land and water, rather than an imposing barrier. Now, this is beautiful. You could say San Francisco Bay, but it also reminds me maybe a little bit of Lake Como in Italy, something about the water that abuts right directly to the edge of the buildings and its courtyards. I love that there's concrete, but there's this graceful little natural wooden connection point between the nature and the house. I think it's quite lovely. The doors to the central hallway open wide, providing a direct connection between the water and the private garden on the landward side. A slatted wooden arbor above the far door shades the west-facing dining room from the summer sun. I do love slatted and wooden arbors like this. When I was little, I always wondered, why would you let the rain through? But now that I've seen it, I've grown to appreciate it more. When you sit there and you watch the sun go down on a leisurely day, it casts these beautiful shadows and patterns onto the wall, onto the floor, onto your teacup if you have the pleasure of sitting there for longer than an hour. This is quite lovely. You can see directly through the house into the water. The first thing that sets this stucco-faced house apart from its neighbors is that it has a real entrance. To create a strong connection between the garden and the water, Smith laid out the first floor of the house as 3 long rooms that stretch between them. There's a combination living and dining room on one end, a kitchen and family eating area on the other, and a hallway and a staircase in between. Each room has identical openings onto the garden and water side, with neighboring houses to the garden and water, the north and south. All the orientation of this house is east to west, to either garden or to water. Inside the house, you'd hardly know the neighbors are only a few feet away. As a result of the strong connections, the house seems to balance between the drama of the water view and the closer, more private world of the garden. On warm, sunny days, the windows and doors on the water side can be thrown open to the deck, but on days when the weather turns windy and hostile, all too often in these parts, the house can turn its back on the water and focus inward on the sheltering garden of the olive trees and flowers. Isn't that a beautifully balanced building? You have both the connection to the outside and the introspective connection to the inside. Both are open, both are able to be closed. When the outside world gets too much, you can retreat to this inner sanctum and reflect. An introvert's paradise, perhaps. But you're never disconnected from the world outside, and you can fling the doors open again to see the view and the sea and smell the air. How lovely. Designing a year-round home in a northern climate is particularly challenging because the winters are so severe. Here, the building is spread out from east to west with broad expanses of windows to capture the low winter sun. Well, that's such a great idea too. People often think about windows, oh, I want light, but they don't think about which way their windows are facing. Depends on which direction they're facing, which climate you inhabit. If you want to get the low winter sun in a northern climate, you need large windows at a certain angle and in a certain direction. All the better if you have some sort of thermal capture floor, maybe terracotta or stone. It can absorb the heat during the winter, even with the shallow and mild winter sunlight rays, and then it can radiate that heat back to you during the day or during the night when there isn't much sunlight. The house is visible from the water, but it doesn't overpower the coastline. It completes the picture, rather than shouting for attention. With beautiful old pasture oaks and gently sloping fields that fall away to the south and overlook a sheltered river estuary, the site for this main house was close to perfect. To the west, the land narrowed to a point with spectacular views across the river to a historic Maine coastal village. To the east, more fields with large trees would shelter the owners, Aidan and Heather, from their neighbor's view. Behind and to the north, the land rose gently and turned from field to oak forest. Ironically, building a house on a seemingly perfect lot is not without its challenges. The west-facing point was spectacular, but building on it would expose the house to the harsh northwest winter winds that come sweeping down the river. It would also mean cutting down a large number of old-growth oaks, and it would shout to the village across the river, "Here we are," which is not the impression Aidan and Heather wanted to create. They knew this site was cherished locally as a beautiful, unspoiled piece of land. They wanted to build a home that would seem as if the site had been waiting for just this house to complete it. Isn't that a lovely thing? When you see a house that's sympathetic to its surroundings and to its history, to its charm, and to its local context. Not a McMansion shoved into a lot between a corner store and a single-story 50s house, but one that actually responds to where it is. The design of the house by Knight Associates was driven by three needs: to avoid the exposures of the western point, to capture winter sun in the south, and to provide shelter from the north. All the daytime rooms open to the winter sun. In winter, sunlight is limited and the sun is low in the south, so it's important that the house captures as much of the light as it can by having the rooms that are used in the daytime spread out from east to west, facing south. Then the occupants can feel the progress of the sun throughout the day. Such an interesting site plan here as well. You have the cold winter winds coming from the north. There's the view of the water towards the south, the driveway coming in from the east, and then more of the bay, the river estuary to the west. And the site plan is directly in the middle, sheltered from and taking advantage of all these different aspects. There's something about this color that I find quite soothing. It's not quite stark white. It doesn't remind you of a hospital. It's a little bit creamy. To me, it reminds me of buttercream, maybe? And I know light polished oak is out of fashion right now, but there's this lovely sunlight captured in it. This really delicate warmth that I love in this particular stain. How do we feel about porches? A lot of houses on the water have open porches, screened porches, or pergolas, but this house has all three. These transition spaces encourage people to venture as far outside as the weather and bugs permit. They extend the protection of the building just a bit. The pergola on the water side of the house serves to change the scale of the two-story facade. By putting a structure here that is more human-sized, you can reach up and touch the beams. It's more comfortable to sit outside and survey one's domain. And when the domain is this good, the owners want to be out in it. The screened porch is positioned on the western side of the house, where the owners can enjoy the setting sun at the end of the day, and escape the bugs, no doubt. It's also important to think about how a porch will shade the inside of the house. Placing this one to the west shades the interior on hot summer days, but doesn't block the sun in winter when it sets much farther to the south. Now there's an interesting and bold color. What would you call that? Like an eggplant almost? Resurrecting a lakeside bungalow in Wisconsin. Now the cedar shakes are lovely. I love how it reminds me of the geometry of bricks. However, the color is going to change over time. It's going to weather, silver, dull into this lovely little elderly gray, I like to call it. I love a house that you can see subtle signs of change on it. You can see how time has affected it, so that your children and their children will have a slightly different version of the house that you have. Something a little bit riper, a little bit more mature, perhaps. Let's see what else we have in this delightful book. Creating a portal to the dunes and the beach beyond, this house in Martha's Vineyard lives in intimate contact with the waterfront. Here we have again this gorgeous inside-outside feeling. I can't help but wonder about bugs flying into your living room, but isn't it lovely to be in the porch, and then to be in your living space, and then to be in the dunes, and you're never quite sure which one is which? I have stood by the water with many clients and shared the excitement they feel about building a house at the edge of land. Living on the water is an almost universal desire, whether it's a house on the beach, high on a cliff, beside a lake, or overlooking a river or stream. But it hasn't always been that way. Many of the houses that feel at home along the coast have been there for 100 years or more. The people who built these original homes weren't necessarily dreaming of a house on the water. They worked outside, doing demanding physical labor, fishing, farming, mining, logging. After a 12-hour day exposed to the elements, they sought shelter in their homes, even shelter from the view, having participated with the water all day. Consequently, houses built in the 1800s were mostly about walls, and in large part they turned their backs on the water. Windows were to admit light and fresh air, and outside views were incidental, almost avoided by planned intent. Today, by contrast, most people living on the water have occupations that keep them inside, In their homes, especially if they have gone to the trouble and expense of buying waterfront properties, they want to experience the water as much as possible. Balancing views to the water against the need for privacy and sense of security is one of the keys to successful waterfront homes. A response to the water. A sense of fitting in. All the issues of siding and massing that make a successful home appear to be in the right design in the right place. The experience of approach, the paths that bring us to the house from land and from water, that predetermine how we experience the house and what we expect of it. I always think of the entranceways to theme parks or to Disneyland or to Disney World or something like that. They channel you into a grand entrance. They set your expectations with how you approach the park. It's the same way for a house. Is it a little meandering garden pathway when you spring upon the front door surprised? Or is it a long, straight, narrow drive with big, imposing doors and pillars on either side? It instructs you on what kind of experience you're going to have once you enter. Balancing looking in and looking out. Here we are again about how much is introverted, how much is extroverted. How views are managed and framed, both outside looking in and inside looking out. Creating gracious transitions. Creating indoor and outdoor spaces such as decks, porches, patios, alcoves, breezeways, courtyards, and sometimes just this space between a cluster of buildings. Composing the elements, how the actual parts that make up the building, windows, doors, roofs, floors, and all their embellishments are used to wed the house to the site. Now this is beautiful. If you don't like gables, maybe you should look away now. I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different directions on the gables on this house. But I think it's charming. On some waterfront sites, the rhythm and scale of the neighboring buildings are the dominant themes that must be addressed for a house to fit in. Scale, proportion, and massing. When we talk about fitting in, there are 3 main factors that come into play: scale, proportion, and massing. Scale is a factor of the size of the building and its components relative to other site features and relative to human size. A house with no scale, a phrase often used by architects, usually means that there is no visual way of assessing how big a building really is, because there are no reliable clues to relate to. For example, a house with all oversized windows and doors may give very misleading information about how big it really is. Sometimes this is used skillfully to create a unique house, as shown in the photo at right. But more often it is a mistake and makes one feel uneasy. Haven't you found that? I've noticed particularly with realty listings, unless there's a potted plant or some other factor that you can scale to in the photo, it's often difficult to find new builds and imagine how big they are. Are they stacked townhomes? Are they low-rise apartments? Are they a single family giant McMansion? Difficult to say unless you have a doorway or something to frame off of. And occasionally when you go and visit in person, you're still blown away. Sometimes the doors are not to scale at all, and the house blocks out the sun. Proportion is related to scale, but a house might be quite well proportioned relative to itself, but out of proportion with the site elements. Massing is the overall impact of the house form relative to the site and to other nearby forms. It is the size and shape of the building. For example, a large block-like house needs a lot of visual space to sit comfortably if it is very close to visual borders to the site, or to other houses that seem to create a border, it will probably look ungainly. I think about that too. If you have a flat plane, then you have something very gentle and curved. It fits into the flat plane. But if you have something big and rectangular, it sticks out. The closer you move other things to it, the more it pops out. It needs more space to sit. But if you have something with like this that has these gentle curves, and with the construction material and with the size and shape, it just fits into the space so naturally. Now this little one I love particularly. I love how it's built with these oversized windows, but also how it sits almost like a Lego build on top of all these stacked blocks of maybe slate or shale, I can't tell. It's natural but somehow still constructed. It reminds me of these beautiful cottages that you can find maybe in Maine or in Muskoka in Canada. They're built on rock like this, but rather than this sort of manufactured slab look, it's built directly on the Canadian Shield that rises out of the earth. And the houses just seem to be perched on top of this little piece of history. Now, there can be a thing, too many windows. I don't know, some people feel uneasy with that much glass. You can see out, yes, but people can also see in. What do you think? Would you put maybe some retractable blinds or sheer curtains, something that can be pulled back, or does it ruin the effect? Maybe you can still wave to passing ships as you make your dinner or change your clothes. Screened porches. It's very interesting to me that that's not a common thing everywhere. I suppose certain places are just more used to, a little bit braver when it comes to the local flora and fauna. I love these little house in context site maps where you can see the elevation, but also the breezes and the winds, also your approach and your view. It's a fun exercise to try that with your apartment or wherever it is that you're staying. What's your approach like? Where does the summer sun hit? Where do you catch the breeze? Now this is an absolutely stunning color. I love this, like a deep olive. If terracotta had a green version, it would be this one. I love the interplay between the brown cedar and this delightful green. Natural materials, subtle shifts in scale, and terrific waterfront views combine to produce a house of seemingly effortless refinement. Sitting quietly on a Rhode Island shore, the house looks as if it's always been there. Now this is a fun one. Not everything needs to be completely traditional. I love the mixture of industrial elements. You have the natural wood, but then you also have steel and exposed metal. I think what would be quite fun would be a metal countertop as well. Architect Com Lenchek uses the term beach warehouse style to describe this unassuming house in Puget Sound. Part of the look derives from the heavy posts or peeler posts, which are the core that is left over after the outer layers of a large tree have been peeled away for plywood veneers. Now there's an interesting section drawing. You can see the pilings that it's built on and the very steep elevation rising up to the east. The only way down to the house is by way of a long wooden staircase that drops from the near streets of suburbia down a jungle-like cliff face to a small beach of land. When the house was rebuilt, all the materials had to be bought in at low tide, when you could drive along the beach for a few hours. You can still come and go this way, but you'd better know your tide tables. Industrial strength. The house is broken into 2 separate buildings, bunkhouse and main house, with a connecting breezeway in between. Here we have again my favorite. You can see how you have the more natural rock on the side, and then the stacked foundations, and then this demure house tucked within the trees. This simple little dock, and a beautiful reflection. A sense of scale. No doubt the plot is much larger, but I enjoy that the house is not oversized. You could have fit a larger house there, but you would have had to do it at the sacrifice of these trees. Instead, you have a house that's more than sufficient, with these large oversized windows to take in the full extent of the view, and I think it's quite sympathetic to the site as well. Now this is so interesting to me. I find this one very reminiscent of East Asian architecture. You know, this is not meant just for decoration or for walking on, but for sitting on, to sit on the edge of this patio on this beautiful hardwood, and to enjoy. Can you imagine the sound of the rain against these rocks? That would be quite lovely. I love the minimalist light fixtures as well, and the mixture of textures, tones, and different finishes on this wood creates its own artwork. I love that it's green and lush outside and wood tones on the inside. I imagine if you walk from the garden in through to the interior of the house, it's like entering a tree. You start at the leafy phase, and then you end up somewhere through the bark and its heartwood. A house of many faces. A corner tower helps make the transition from the somewhat austere farmhouse facade on the landward side to the more expansive summer house overlooking the water. Now, houses like these have always charmed me. They remind me very much of maybe Anne of Green Gables, something like that. With twin gables, a full-length porch, rocking chairs, and beach roses, the house turns its summer house and summertime facade to the water. A house of many faces. Now this I find charming. This color is almost like an apple green. I imagine there's an orchard somewhere outside and the color is just carried into the house. You still get the texture and the warmth of wood wainscoting, but without the overwhelming color of the wood. The entry hall is distinguished from the rooms of the house by the green painted wainscoting and trim, which conveys the sense that you've arrived in a place and not just a passage. With the simple addition of just some places to sit and some warm textures, some artwork, suddenly it's not just a place to pass through, but it's a place where you can sit and enjoy, take off your boots, maybe think about what activity you're going to do next. There's some lovely wooden oars in the corner here. I always think about at the end of parties when you're leaving or when someone's leaving your house and you just linger because everyone's having such a good time, or because it's not someone you want to say goodbye to. And this is the kind of space you want to do that in, somewhere that's still warm and open for conversation. It's not hurrying you out of the house. It's not hurrying you into the house. It's just there to live in and to be accessed and to be maybe even enjoyed a little bit. How about you? Is there somewhere that you like to sit and talk or spend time with family or friends that's a little bit out of the ordinary? For me, it's the stairs. I always like to sit on the edge of the stairs, even when I was little at parties, and you can kind of watch from above and see what all the grown-ups are doing. This particular style of this lantern, I don't know, it reminds me a bit of the ocean as well, something nautical about it. I like, even though the house is filled with all these wood textures, stone, wood, more wood, you have these little callbacks to the sea that is just outside. And again, there's something so soothing about this particular kind of green. It's one of my favorites. You can see here that they've carried it up into these banisters. Repeating cutouts in the stair railings reflect the owner's love of bird watching. Varying the profile of the cutouts slightly makes it appear that the birds are in motion. Oh, I love that. That's such a thoughtful little detail. I know we don't always have the luxury of living in custom-made spaces. Sometimes we live where we can, and there's no shame in that. But if you get the chance to do something original, something specific, I think it's quite a lovely little change. It makes the space personal and makes the space yours. I know we live in the shower era, but there's something luxurious about a tub like that, don't you think? An ample bathroom with minimal clutter takes advantage of the great view over the water. I love that, but I always wonder about the view back into the bathrooms. New details for old houses. For an architect, part of the challenge of creating a house that refers back to an early style is dealing with design situations that weren't an issue for an earlier generation of builders and designers. Take vents, for example. Builders didn't need to incorporate vents into 19th century houses because the buildings weren't insulated. Moisture vapor and condensation weren't a problem because the wind more or less blew through the cracks in the house. With improvements in insulation technology, however, some form of venting is essential in any conventionally insulated house. On this island house, Chiavano incorporated an unobtrusive soffit vent that blends perfectly with the style of the house. The narrow vent strip parallels the roof edge, framing the soffit with a precise black line. Subtly decorative, it looks like it belongs on a 19th century farmhouse. That's something I also love. I know, there's a lot of loves in this particular one. But finding modern and contemporary and stylish solutions for problems that you didn't know existed. Look at that, it's so subtle. It doesn't detract from the architecture and the character of the original history, but it also makes sure that contemporary people are living in a contemporary house. One of my pet peeves, I think, is probably smoke alarms. They haven't been redesigned in about 50 or 60 years, so you can have a beautiful contemporary house with clean lines, or a lovely 19th century restored building like this one, and you have the exact same smoke alarm or smoke detector or CO2 detector that everybody else has, and that kind of grungy off-white. So maybe that's a thought. If you're a designer, can you come up with some new smoke detectors, please? Now that's a porch. The main waterfront porch has the rough and the ready appearance of a wharfside warehouse. There's something that's very, perhaps the word is honest, about architecture like this. There's no glass, there's nothing pretty or polished about it. You have galvanized roof, you have exposed beams and structures. You have almost like a variation of a chicken wire on the fencing. The wood itself is not even stained, but somehow it feels lived in. Wouldn't you love to just relax in this lovely little rocking chair in the sunshine and listen to the cicadas? Porches are the great intermediate zones between being outside at the mercy of the elements and being inside and in control. On the porch, you're closer to the edges, shifting from inside to outside, and often from land towards water. The powerful barn-like form of this main roof sweeps down to the lower pitched roofs, which embrace the porches that extend over the water. In New England, where I live, the porch has an emblematic function as a reminder of a slower, more contemplative time. It also has practical uses as a buffer against bad weather and as a transition zone where you gradually shed the protection of the house. In the lowlands of South Carolina, where this house is located, the porch is a survival tool, providing pools of shade around the living space in the heat of the day. What an interesting thought. A porch as not just an emblematic design, but also as a complete function. That's something I feel that has really gone away in modern architecture. Part of it is design, yes. It's not cost effective and it's not keeping in thermal properties to design too many porches, especially on high rises, buildings like that. But there's also this idea that perhaps our focus as societies, particularly Western societies, we focus more now on productivity. There's not an emphasis on sitting on the porch with your neighbors, maybe a glass of lemonade or a tea, enjoying the views. You're either inside or you're outside. And sometimes I lament the loss of these transient spaces, these spaces of being in between. I think something so interesting and usually overlooked in terms of architecture is how much lighting can have a play in the mood and the feel of your house. Light fixtures tend to be so expensive, but it's a nice alternative to the anatomically semi-accurate ones that are standard in most homes that shed that harsh white light. It's amazing what you can do for ambiance if you just turn off the overhead light and put a couple of softer, maybe golden glow bulbs and some lamps in the corners. It completely changes the mood. Now this is an interesting version. We've really gone into the contemporary corners with this one. Look at these clean lines. Everything is straight, geometric. Even the windows are square. The challenge with a house that's so close to the water and to the public walkways is to engage the house with the canal and garden while maintaining privacy inside. I like what they've utilized in this corner house, even though it's not the main one, is that they've utilized roof space. You see that much more often now, especially in high-rise apartments, low-rises, new builds, is that people are craving outdoor space. You have a rooftop, why not utilize it? You get views, you get breeze. My favorite thing to see is gardens, rooftop gardens. You know, it's been an architectural feature ever since the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Architecture and art is such an interesting and sometimes controversial connection, but I think this particular piece works great in this space. It reminds me of leaves or petals, something nature-inspired, something organic. Even with these stark colors and lines and textures and materials, it doesn't quite match, but it does evoke the tropical foliage that's just outside. Well, I find the white expanse and the cool gray floors give you a little bit of a break from this lush and dense foliage outside. The living room furniture, the dining table and the chairs, and the conversation area beyond are islands of repose in the sea of concrete that flows from the entry to the garden. This is an interesting idea as well. Often you see beds that are right up against windows, particularly on social media. But if you want a little bit of privacy while still being accessible to the views, I think this is such a subtle and simple way to do that. You have an island of privacy here, and then connected on either side is just these oasis views. Light flooding in through small slit windows in the side walls filter through the open riser stair, creating an ever-changing light sculpture as the sun moves throughout the day. That's always fun, whether you're using blinds, whether you're using custom-made windows and open riser staircases. Watching the play of the sun over the walls of the architecture of your home is such a soothing and relaxing thing to do. I have always personally been a little bit scared of open risers. Perhaps that's because I'm clumsy. I always think, what if I go for some water in the middle of the night and my foot goes right through? Or if you have a cat, they never do what they're told, especially if they're orange. And they always want to go places that they don't want to, or small children. They always frighten me, open risers. But I do love how they've utilized it in this space to allow the light to flow from the outside of the building into the inner space without being closed off and cave-like. Back to my favorite. Now that is a Zen view. Clean lines, warm colors, and just water. From the land side, walls, roof overhangs, and the space formed with a roof over the upper deck form a striking composition. With the door to the boat slid open, you can see clear through the house to the lake. I like this. Now, is this a boathouse with a house component, or is this a house with the boat component attached? I like that it's blurred in between. And look at how simple the site plan and the cross-section is. Here you have the water line and the boat operating in its own space within the house, almost creating the heart of this home in this central cavern. And the home exists along the top of it. At Lake Muskoka, where this boathouse is located, there's a granite ledge not far below the lake bottom, so driving down pilings wouldn't work. Here, a fascinating method of building crypts. Wooden cages filled with rocks was used. You can see that evidenced here. According to the architects, it begins with the overall dock layout on the frozen lake during the winter prior to construction season. The position of each crib is drawn, and a hole is cut into the ice, whereupon sleepers, horizontal beams, are laid to span and provide support for the entire crib assembly. As each crib is completed, the ends of the sleepers are cut and the cribs are lowered through the holes to settle on the lake bed. Before the holes and the ice freeze over, granite rocks are dropped into the cribs as ballast. Now that's definitely a Canadian solution for a Canadian problem. When your construction plan begins with, cut a hole in the ice, you know you're in the Great White North. I do love this as a more eco-friendly and natural alternative. Rather than drilling into the lake bed, rather than pouring concrete pilings, you're using natural resources already in a much less invasive manner. And the output is the same. Ingenious solutions for ingenious problems. The downward swoop of the curved wood ceiling gives the bedroom the feel of a stateroom on a yacht. The lower height changes the scale of the space, making it cozy as well as beautiful. Now, curved roofs aren't something that you see very often, but I do love that how it is evoking the feeling of being in a ship. Again, blurring the lines between whether you're in a house that's made for water vehicles or a place that's made for people and water is just attached. think one of the great tragedies of modern architecture is the lack of nooks and crannies. Something like this you don't see very often anymore. Window seating. The window seat along the curved bay lends gracefully to the door above the water. A hinged top in the window seat allows storage for the stuffs used only once in a while. So tell me, would you rather the main floor on this, or would you rather take the ladder up to the loft? With its own small curved bay window seat, the waterside bedroom on the first floor echoes the design of the living room, while the private loft sets it apart as a room of its own. The round window frames a view over the guest house to the bay beyond. What a cozy kitchen. That's quite a bit of lighting. Perhaps we could minimize it to 2 or 3 rather than 6. But I suppose it's your preference. There's something romantic about window seats, I think. They're made for daydreaming. They're made for being in a little state with a book and perhaps a cup of tea and whiling away a few hours while the rain falls. I think window seats are a lovely invitation to not always be on the grind, but just to sit and just to be in the moment. The sheltering warmth of an inward-looking sitting area contrasts with the expansiveness of the waterside exposure. Speaking of expansive views, I don't think it'll get much more expansive than that. I love that the walls, or rather the doors, completely move aside to create an opening space that's almost the entire size of the side of the building. Tom and Sally weren't looking for a house that makes a statement. Their wish list was essentially for a cabin with a combined living space and rooms for sleeping and bathing. The architect Cutler gave them 3 separate cabins set at slightly different angles and connected by a sawed roof overhead. The parents' bed and bath are in one cabin, a dormitory wing is in another, with a communal living space in the center. The passages between the 3 units are also the primary connections back to the land and down to the water. Speaking of nooks and crannies and little spaces in between, don't you feel like that this little corner is somewhere you would curl up with as a kid? Maybe with your journal or your diary, maybe with some colored pencils and a sketchbook, creating little worlds. This is a space that has a little room left for imagination, I think. Now this is charming. Tucked along the shore, this house deftly weaves itself into the fabric of the neighboring wood houses, while at the same time remaining elegantly distinctive. Again, we have the cedar shakes. I love this almost hidden garden concept of approaching this house. The framed openings in the gable wall above the entry, a device characteristic of shingle-style buildings, allow light into the large window at the stair hall while still ensuring privacy on the second floor inside. A pause, then enter. From the street, the driveway opens onto a motor courtyard slightly below street level. The courtyard is framed by a lush shade garden, protected here from the sun and winds off the narrows on the side of the house. There is a great sense of arrival and repose, but the powerful form of the entrance gable asserts itself and draws you towards the front door. With this, the owners get it all: protection over the porch, a welcoming entry, light inside, and privacy. I think we'll finish up with this, the elegance of simplicity. A small sitting porch and a diagonal entry ramp, the only element of the rectangular grid, welcomes us to a house reduced to its essence. I feel like modern architecture is a competition between minimalism and maximalism. Sometimes it's nice to see something that is simple but still elegant, that is not obscene in how grandiose it is, but is also not reduced down to its bare elements, like you're just surviving. This reminds me of cottages or hunting cabins, maybe something that your parents or your grandparents might have tucked away in a wood somewhere. It also reminds me of a sauna, something secluded, tucked away, somewhere where you're supposed to just sit. It's interesting how the architecture and the furniture are combined in this space. Rough-hewn, very simple in its shape, but it fits somehow. I think anything more would seem out of place. Balancing on the edge. Look closely, and you'll see the house perched on the cliff top, shrouded in pines on all sides. Very little of the natural environment was disturbed to make way for this house. This, I think, is stunning. It's like walking into an old-growth forest, sequoias or redwoods. In this case, towering ponderosa pine trunks, tucked in from the Rockies, form a 4-post entry foyer that changes the scale of the interior and brings light deep into the house. Look at these echoes of wood tones. And the cupboards, very sleek and modern, but still wooden. You have all the pitting and all the pockmarks and knots left in the kitchen table. But then you have a slightly more finished form. You have unstained fixtures and these beautiful ponderosa pines. It sits a few hundred feet above the Pacific Ocean in Northern California. Silhouetted against the evening sky, the simplicity and power of the roof shape stands in counterpoint to the rhythm of windows and door openings marching along the south-facing porch. I love to think that even though this is a set structure, it's concrete, it's immovable, there is still a motion, a play, and a music to architecture if it's done properly. As they say, the rhythm of the windows marching along the south-facing porch. Now this is a rough stucco finish against a very plain sort of wall with exposed beams and rafters. What do you think? Do you think it matches? Do you think it's a nice contrast, or do you think it clashes? Again, the interest in this particular one is not color, because it's relatively monochromatic, but it's in shape. We have these beautiful triangles, we have these gables going at different directions, we have cross beams intersecting, we have square windows, and also these large, heavy beams going across as well. We've got floor changes at right angles. It's somewhere you could sit and watch for ages. And here it is. You can barely make out the house, just tucked into the trees at the top. Here we have again one of my favorites, inside or outside, inside, outside, blurred. You can't always tell the difference. This is a home on the Connecticut River. Here we have someone who's definitely conscious of the shape of their beams and their openings, adding these delicious little curves in an otherwise very straight and geometric space. Now, if I had to describe a place that screamed, or rather whispered Zen, I think it would be something like this. A small natural pool carved on the ledge graces the north side of the property. The intentional imprint of the leaves on the concrete finish adds to the feeling that the pool grows out of the rock. That's quite fun. If you have to use a very man-made material such as concrete, I do like when it is attempting to match the natural. So you have, finished stone, you have more natural stone, and then you have concrete. I think what's also interesting in blurring the distinction between man-made, artificial, and natural elements is if you're doing a contemporary home and you have concrete walls, sort of a brutalist or industrialist look, you can press cedar planks into them as the walls are setting. When you remove the planks once the wall has set and the concrete is firm, you're left with, yes, the monochromatic gray and also the texture, that industrial texture of that man-made material, but imprinted is all the knots, swirls, and designs of a more natural pine plank, and it's endlessly fascinating to look at. Who wouldn't love to live in a modern-day treehouse? What style is this? Designed in the mid-1980s at the height of what the media has dubbed the postmodern style, this house represented the best of an era when architects experimented with new ways of thinking about design. Beginning in the late 1960s, postmodern architects used humor and changes of scale to make buildings more expressive than would have been deemed proper a generation earlier. Though some of those buildings might look silly today, particularly those that were driven entirely by style, the good ones remain relevant because their creators relied on their instincts about the proper use of space, form, and motion, which is how good buildings have always been designed. Good design becomes classic, regardless of the era that it lives in. Do you agree with that? Do you think that there's some designs that seemed avant-garde at the moment that have become classic? Or do you think they always look a little bit off? I feel like there's a move slightly more back towards what we would deem classical architecture, something probably early 1900s and earlier. There's even been a resurgence in sort of neoclassical Greek and Roman architecture. Lots of pillars are re-emerging. What are your thoughts on that? Now there's a dizzying view. Something delightful about a landing where you can look down into other spaces. But I also worry about echo. This is the kitchen. This is for having warm, personal talks. It's a little bit controversial if you can hear it all from the bedrooms and the bathrooms. The cottage at the camp. Again, we see the delightfully grayed shingles, weathered by the elements. Traditional cottage styles with the white slip covers on the furniture, the more traditional windows, the open beams, the creamy white finishes. There's something so softly romantic about rooms like this, tucked up in the attic. It makes me think of daydreaming and writing. All the good writers seem to have spent time in an attic at some point or another. With exposed rafters under a low roof and a chair rail trim at mid-height. That's this right around the corner here. There's a wonderful sense of cozy containment in the upstairs master bedroom. The double-hung windows drop down low to provide a view of the ocean beyond the dunes. This is again why it's so important to consider the actual space and not just what you're putting into it. By making these windows so low, as you lie in bed, you still get the view of the ocean. It's this lovely, soft, almost grayish sage color that I think complements the cream so well. I worry about insulation. Is it drafty? When you're this cozy and this charming, do you even care? Again, my favorite. Porches, window seats, gables, shingles. Not extravagant, but timeless. They say this is a camp house. I think it's more of a luxurious mansion. But either way, it's charming. Again, is there such a thing as too many windows? Would you tan on the inside of your home? Can you imagine the view? Watching the sandpipers along the shore in the early morning? Watching the sun set, perhaps, depending on which way it's facing? Curled up in these cozy throws, again with a hot cup of tea or maybe cocoa, a book, and dogs, definitely dogs. And that smell of the sea salt in the air. Again, curtains I understand, privacy I understand, but there's something charming if you've ever been walking along the beach or a waterfront, and you get just a little glimpse, not of somebody's personal life, but of the warmth that's existing within a building, this warm yellow and golden light that's shining out amongst all these grays and greens. It's beautiful for them to be in the light and in that yellow warmth, looking out on the cold and unaffected by it. But it's also lovely when you're in the cold and you're walking by and you get this little tiny glimpse of hearth and home. Well, thank you so much for joining me as we just sort of rambled about architecture, homes, and the water. It's been a delight having you here. I hope it brought some good reminiscing, some good memories, or helped you dream something nice about the future. Tell me, what would your home on the water look like? You can be guaranteed mine has gables and shingles, at least one porch, and lots of windows. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye-bye.